When Tim Allen's Hollywood Hills estate was said to be headed toward a sale, the expectation was almost automatic. A famous address, a famous name, a predictable ritual of glossy photos and breathless headlines about views, finishes, and celebrity lifestyle. The kind of listing that sells a fantasy as much as it sells square footage. But the story that began circulating around this property did not sound like a dream home being prepared for the next owner. It sounded like a place that had been carefully managed to keep certain questions from ever forming in the first place. People described arriving with the usual mindset of a high-end tour, counting bedrooms, noting the light through floor-to-ceiling glass, imagining quiet mornings above the canyon. Yet more than one visitor reportedly left with the same odd sensation, a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. It was the stillness, the kind that does not feel restful, but deliberate. A stage calm that makes you notice your own footsteps, makes you lower your voice without realizing why, as if the house itself is listening. At first, the details that raised eyebrows were small enough to dismiss. A corridor that felt too long, then ended too quickly. A door placed where it seemed to belong to something larger, yet opened into nothing of consequence. Rooms that looked generous in documents, but somehow felt tighter in person. In expensive homes, these mismatches can happen for innocent reasons, renovations, extensions, design choices that evolve over time. But what unsettled the people involved, at least according to the account you are about to hear, was not a single anomaly. It was a pattern of anomalies that all leaned the same way, toward omission. There were areas, they said, that no one toured. Not because they were under construction or messy, but because they were simply off limits. A housekeeper, someone who had worked there for years, allegedly admitted she had never set foot in certain parts of the property. Not once. She cleaned almost everything else, yet there were sections she did not approach, as though the rules were not spoken but absorbed. It was not just that doors were locked, she implied. It was that asking about the locks felt like crossing a line you could not uncross. Then the whispers became more structured. Real estate professionals, used to eccentric layouts and privacy-minded clients, reportedly began noticing a paper trail that felt unusually vague. Renovations delayed without a clear explanation. Architectural plans that seemed to change direction abruptly. Records that described the property in ways that did not fully match what was seen on site. It was the kind of administrative fog that can be mundane, but can also be strategic, especially when a property's true footprint is something you prefer to keep flexible. The tension escalated when due diligence stopped being a formality and became a form of verification. In homes of this scale, inspections are not just about cracks in concrete or old wiring. They're about confirming that what is sold is what exists, that the story told on paper aligns with what stands in front of you. And according to the narrative, that is where things stopped being merely odd and became genuinely unsettling. There are claims that the overall square footage did not reconcile cleanly, as if the house was larger than the official story allowed it to be. The idea sounds abstract until you picture it. A property that seems to contain more space than it admits. A gap between what is measured and what is declared. A scan, described as routine for a high-end sale, allegedly suggested a hollowed-out area beneath the house that was not documented in official materials. On its own, that could be a forgotten storage space, an old feature from previous ownership, a quirk of hillside construction. But in the story being told, it was the response that amplified the alarm. Questions were deflected. Explanations were minimal. The mood changed from cooperative to guarded, as if even the act of asking was too close to something that should remain untouched. And once people start walking away from a tour not because they dislike the decor, but because they feel they're being invited into a secret, the house becomes more than a listing. It becomes a rumor with a floor plan. It becomes a set of locked doors that other people have been instructed not to mention. It becomes the unsettling possibility that beneath the image of a polished public life, there was a private architecture built around control. That is the atmosphere hanging over this estate in the account we are examining. Not a confirmed crime, not a proven scandal, but a sequence of details and reactions that point toward the same uncomfortable thought. Something about this place did not want to be understood, and the closer outsiders got to understanding it, the more the story suggests the property pushed back. Long before anyone began whispering about strange measurements and locked wings, Tim Allen had already lived a life shaped by two competing forces: the desire to be seen and the instinct to protect what the public could never fully understand. It is easy to remember him as the reassuring face of American sitcom comfort, the loud, lovable handyman who turned everyday mishaps into punchlines. But the foundation under that image was not built in a straight line. It was assembled from loss, reinvention, and a private discipline that only becomes visible when the spotlight moves away. Allen was born in 1953, and one of the most defining ruptures in his early life came when he was still a child, after his father died in a car crash. In interviews and profiles over the years, that moment has often been described as a before and after, the kind of event that does not merely hurt, but quietly rearranges a person's sense of safety. The family later relocated, and Allen has spoken about feeling displaced in a new social hierarchy, as if the ground under him kept shifting. That sort of experience can produce two outcomes in the same person. It can create a hunger for attention, for belonging, for control of the narrative. And it can also create a deep suspicion of how quickly life can change, how quickly stability can vanish. By the time he found his way into comedy, he was not simply chasing laughs. Stand-up rewarded what he was learning to do instinctively: take discomfort, turn it into performance, and decide what parts of himself would be shown and what parts would remain sealed behind the curtain. When Home Improvement arrived in 1991, it did more than make him famous. It made him familiar. For 8 seasons, millions watched him embody a kind of accessible masculinity, messy but ultimately safe, a father figure who blundered yet always returned to warmth. The show's success did what mass television always does at its peak. It simplified the person into a symbol. Tim Allen became an idea that audiences felt they owned. But symbols are heavy, because while a sitcom character resets at the end of every episode, a real person carries everything forward. Allen's broader career amplified that contrast. He voiced Buzz Lightyear, played Santa Claus, became a staple of family entertainment. On the surface, it looked like a clean, linear rise. Yet the public record of his life includes darker chapters, including legal trouble in the late 1970s connected to drug trafficking, a period that ended in incarceration and parole in the early 1980s. For many viewers, those facts were either unknown or distant, the kind of detail that gets filed away under past mistakes. But for the person who lived them, past does not stay politely in the background. It becomes a silent reference point, a reminder of what it costs to rebuild, and how fragile reputations truly are. This matters because once a person has fought their way out of a collapse, they tend to develop a heightened sensitivity to exposure. They learn that visibility is not only opportunity, it is vulnerability. They become attentive to who can access what, who might misinterpret what, who might use what. Over time, that sensitivity can turn into strict boundaries, not only in relationships, but in spaces, in routines, in the architecture of daily life. It is not difficult to see why a celebrity with a complicated personal history might favor privacy, control, and layers of security, even if outsiders interpret those instincts as cold or excessive. And this is where the estate narrative becomes emotionally believable, even before it is factually believable. The video you shared frames the house as a fortress of secrecy, but in reality, reporting from established outlets has described Allen's Hollywood Hills West property as a far more conventional ranch-style home, around high 604 square feet, with 3 bedrooms, set among trees near canyon views. Contemporary real estate coverage also indicates he bought that home in 2012, later listed it, and eventually sold it in 2016. That contrast is crucial because it suggests the online storytelling space may be inflating ordinary celebrity privacy into something more sinister, stretching the silhouette of a real place until it looks like a thriller set. Still, a person's relationship with privacy does not have to be criminal to be intense. There is also the reality of modern celebrity culture, where rumors become content and content becomes currency. Even unverified claims can attach themselves to a public figure and live forever. In recent years, for example, allegations from Pamela Anderson about inappropriate behavior on the set of Home Improvement have circulated widely, even as Allen has publicly denied them. Whether people believe such claims or not, the broader effect is the same. The public feels entitled to speculate, and the individual is forced to navigate a world where reputation can be attacked in narratives that do not require proof to spread. So when a transcript describes a man who is unusually guarded about his home, it is tapping into something audiences already understand on a gut level. If you've spent decades being watched, quoted, analyzed, and rewritten, your home stops being just a home. It becomes the one place you try to keep unedited. The one environment where you can decide what exists and what is not, what is accessible and what is not. And if you believe that a single misunderstanding could become a headline, those boundaries can harden into rules. That is the emotional spine beneath this story. Not that the estate must contain horrors, but that the man at the center of the rumor has lived enough to fear what exposure can do. A career built on warmth and familiarity can paradoxically create a stronger need for private distance. And once that need exists, it becomes easy for outsiders, especially outsiders hungry for a darker narrative, to interpret every locked door as a confession. By the time the underground, hollow space rumor started circulating, the estate had already developed a reputation among insiders as a property with a second face. The first face was what you'd expect: Hollywood polish, curated luxury, the kind of place designed to reassure buyers that the celebrity lifestyle is simply wealth made visible. The second face, according to the narrative in your transcript, was something else entirely: a house that resisted being mapped, inspected, or fully understood. And that resistance reportedly became most obvious in a place that should have been the easiest to read: the garage. On paper, a celebrity garage is a selling point, not a complication. It's a trophy room you can photograph. It's the part of the house that invites admiration without inviting questions. In this story, the garage initially appears to be exactly that: a spotless showroom lined with classic cars, muscle builds, and rare motorcycles, an extension of the well-known car guy identity. If the tour ended there, buyers would leave thinking they'd seen something intimate, something real. But the people who claimed to have paid closer attention said the garage didn't behave like a simple display space. It felt too large for what was described in the records. It had corners that didn't match the geometry of the rest of the structure. And even more telling, it had areas that were treated as off-limits in a way that didn't fit the logic of a garage. A car collection is something you show. You don't usually need secrecy around it. The transcript leans into one particular feature as the first true rupture: the mechanic's pit. In high-end homes, a pit can be a dream detail, an enthusiast playground. But in the version of events being told here, the pit was allegedly deeper than necessary and reinforced far beyond normal construction standards, as if it had been designed for more than routine maintenance. On its own, that could be dismissed as over-engineering. Some people build to extremes simply because they can. The problem, in the story's logic, is what happened next. Someone reportedly pushed for further examination, and the examination was abruptly shut down. Not postponed, not redirected, shut down. The contractor allegedly said it made no sense unless there was something the team didn't want inspected. That kind of moment is important because it's not about what was found, it's about what was prevented. In real estate, prevention is its own form of information. Most issues, foundation quirks, structural retrofits, even questionable remodels, can be negotiated. You don't stop the process unless the cost of discovery is higher than the cost of suspicion. Then the story adds a second layer: absence. Visitors, according to the transcript, noticed that certain cars Allen had previously displayed publicly were not present. That detail matters because it creates a subtle contradiction between public persona and private reality. It's not that cars missing is inherently suspicious. Collections change constantly, but the narrative frames it differently, as if the public display had been curated to signal one version of wealth, while the private inventory was being quietly managed, moved, or erased. And that's when we get to the objects the story wants you to fear most. The boxes. In one corner, tucked away like the kind of clutter everyone pretends not to see during a tour, there were allegedly faded boxes marked with coded labels. Not tax records or personal files, but codes, symbols of categorization without explanation. The transcript claims one assistant caught a glimpse inside an open box and thought she saw old VHS tapes, handwritten notes, and what appeared to be sensitive documents. Whether that's true or embellished, the narrative function is clear. It shifts the garage from a place of passion to a place of storage, from machines you're meant to admire to materials you're not meant to interpret. The garage becomes a staging area, not a hobby. And once the viewer accepts the possibility that the garage contains hidden information, every other detail in the story begins to tighten. The oversized footprint, the reinforced pit, the stopped inspection, the coded boxes. They start to feel like components of a single architecture of control. Control over space, over access, and over what outsiders are allowed to know. That architecture becomes even more pronounced when the transcript introduces the panic room. Panic rooms are supposed to calm fears. They're built as a response to external threat, intrusion, kidnapping, stalking, celebrity vulnerability. They're marketed as safety. But in this telling, the panic room is framed as something closer to containment. It starts, again, not with a door but with a gap. An architect reviewing the layout allegedly noticed a void, dead space in the blueprint that had no functional explanation and no visible access point. A section that existed in measurements, but not in the lived experience of the floor plan. In well-documented homes, voids like that have labels. Mechanical chase, attic cavity, structural support, crawl space. In this narrative, the void had none, and that absence is presented as the reason suspicion sharpened into alarm. The story claims a combination of scans and old renovation permits helped piece together the truth. There was a hidden fortified room, and it had been kept off the disclosed layout. Still, even a hidden safe room can be rationalized. Wealthy homeowners sometimes avoid disclosing security details for obvious reasons. But then the transcript pushes past hidden into erased. Once buyers requested access to all sections of the property, the response was described as silence. After that, a team arrived to conduct a private assessment, and the narrative claims the panic room area had been sealed off, reinforced walls, blocked entrance, and the original void filled in so it no longer appeared as a gap. This is the point where the story becomes less about architecture and more about intent. A hidden room is secrecy. A sealed room, right before outsiders inspect, is urgency. And urgency implies fear. Fear of discovery, fear of consequence, fear of what happens when the inside becomes visible to the outside. One real estate agent, the transcript claims, was shaken because they had seen earlier layouts showing the space and then watched those traces disappear. The implication is not subtle. Something existed, and then someone made sure it couldn't be reached. And here is where the narrative pivots to the question it wants to burn into the viewer's mind. If this was just a safe room, why would anyone need to seal it as if it were evidence? The transcript doesn't answer that question yet. Instead, it uses the question as pressure, pushing the audience forward toward the next reveal. It signals that the garage was only a warning sign. The panic room was a containment strategy, and the true core of the mystery is not the existence of hidden spaces, but the pattern that follows them. Discover, deflect, deny, and if necessary, erase. Because once you accept the pattern, the next object is inevitable, the locked filing cabinet. Not hidden behind a false wall, not buried underground, just sitting there, ordinary enough to overlook until you notice the lock is not a lock at all, but a biometric gatekeeper meant to keep certain information in the dark. If the garage felt like a warning, the panic room was framed as a turning point because it introduced something far more unsettling than odd square footage or coded boxes. It introduced intent. According to the story in the transcript, this wasn't just a home with eccentric features. It was a home that seemed to react when outsiders got too close. The first disturbing detail is how the panic room allegedly revealed itself. Not through disclosure, not through a door shown during a tour, but through an absence. A void in the blueprint. An architectural dead space that didn't belong to any normal function, yet measured like a fully formed section of the house. In high-end properties, that kind of discrepancy is more than a curiosity. It's a risk, because it signals either undocumented construction or deliberate concealment, and both can complicate everything from insurance to resale to liability. So, in this telling, the representatives of potential buyers pushed for clarity. They wanted access to every section of the home, not because they were trying to be intrusive, but because due diligence demands it. Yet the response they received, according to the transcript, was not cooperation, it was silence. And silence has a way of becoming louder than denial. It doesn't resolve questions. It multiplies them. Then comes the episode that transforms suspicion into alarm, the room being sealed. The transcript describes a team arriving to conduct a private assessment, only to discover the suspected area had effectively been erased. Walls reinforced, the possible entrance blocked. The void that once suggested hidden space no longer appeared as a void at all. The most unsettling part isn't the modification itself. Renovations happen. It's the timing. The story implies the sealing occurred after the room's existence was noticed and before it could be verified. That sequence creates the impression of a scramble, as if someone was racing against inspection. A real estate agent in the transcript claims to have seen the earlier layout before the changes, and their reaction is simple and chilling. I know what I saw. In the logic of this story, that statement functions like a witness line in a thriller. Not definitive evidence, but enough to keep the viewer's mind locked onto the same question. If it was nothing, why hide it twice? First by omission, then by permanent obstruction? At this point, the narrative pivots from physical concealment to informational concealment, and the next object becomes the perfect bridge, the filing cabinet. The transcript describes it as old and unassuming, tucked into a lesser-used part of the home. Precisely the kind of detail that would normally fade into the background. But what made it impossible to ignore, the story says, was the lock. Not a key, not a combination. A high-security biometric lock, the kind that signals the contents aren't sentimental, they're sensitive. That's where the tone shifts. Because a hidden room can be rationalized as security. A reinforced wall can be dismissed as privacy. But a biometric cabinet suggests records. Documents. Proof. It implies the homeowner isn't only protecting themselves from intruders. They're protecting something from discovery. In the transcript, the moment buyers' teams begin cataloging the home's contents, the cabinet becomes a flashpoint. Requests are made to include it in inventory. The answer is immediate, off-limits, no access, not included. There is no negotiation, no partial accommodation, no we'll handle it later. Just refusal. And refusal, in a sale, is a form of escalation. Because refusing access doesn't only make people suspect what's inside, it signals that what's inside matters more than closing the deal. Then comes the anonymous worker account. A claim that the cabinet once contained folders labeled with dates and names, and lower drawers holding unmarked tapes, recordings of conversations not meant to be heard. Whether that's factual or rumor, it's structurally important to the narrative because it reframes the cabinet as an archive. Not a safe, not a stash, an archive, something built over time, curated and preserved. The story sharpens further with one specific image, the alleged photograph. A single photo, not of Tim, but of someone else, staring into the camera with a pale, frozen expression, like they were caught mid-moment and never meant to be captured at all. This is the transcript's most cinematic detail, because it turns abstract secrets into a human presence. It suggests that whatever was recorded and stored wasn't just business. It involved people who might not have consented to being part of that record. Then, just as with the panic room, the transcript describes removal. The cabinet is moved. Access becomes stricter. And when the estate is put on the market, the cabinet is allegedly removed entirely before potential buyers can examine it again. At this stage, the house in the narrative is no longer a structure. It's a system. Conceal the space, control the documents, and eliminate anything that could be independently verified. And that is exactly why the next part of the story lands as hard as it does. Surveillance footage that disappears. According to the transcript, the estate was equipped with high-end cameras covering entrances, hallways, key points, standard for a celebrity property. But the claim isn't merely that cameras existed. It's that Allen allegedly became obsessive about them, reviewing footage frequently, sometimes alone late at night, monitoring the recordings not like a casual check, but like a ritual. A friend or associate notices something is off. Allen appears shaken while watching footage. When questioned, he shuts the laptop, locks the office, and ends the conversation abruptly. And then, this is the detail designed to seal the dread. The next day, the entire system is wiped. Not a partial deletion, not a lost file, a full system purge that leaves no recoverable backups. In real life, there have been 9 reasons someone might delete surveillance footage: privacy, security, paranoia about hacking, fear of leaks. But within the logic of this story, that explanation collapses under one stubborn question. If the footage showed a threat from outside, an intruder, a stalker, why erase the evidence that could protect you? So the transcript invites the viewer to consider darker alternatives. The footage might have captured something inside the house. A private meeting, an entry into a space that wasn't supposed to be accessible, or movement around the very area later sealed off. The wipe becomes less like privacy management and more like cleanup. And that's where the narrative arrives at its most dangerous implication: that the estate wasn't only built to protect a celebrity from the world, but to protect a hidden narrative from being seen, documented, or proven. Because once footage is gone, a cabinet is removed, and a room is sealed, all that remains is what people remember, and what stories can be built for what they remember. And in the world of rumors, memory becomes evidence in the court of public curiosity. By the time the panic room was allegedly sealed and the biometric filing cabinet removed from view, the estate's story had already crossed a line. It was no longer simply a matter of odd architecture or celebrity privacy. In the narrative you provided, it had become a deliberate pattern. When an outsider gets too close to something measurable, space, records, footage, the response isn't clarification. It's closure. And then, right when that pattern feels complete, the transcript introduces the detail designed to push the audience from suspicion into dread. The claim that investigators finally gained access to the panic room area during a later inspection and discovered it wasn't empty. Not just reinforced walls, not just a blocked entrance, a concealed compartment behind a false wall. Something built to survive scrutiny precisely because it was never meant to be found. In this account, the compartment is where the story shifts from atmosphere to objects, because objects can be photographed, cataloged, and interpreted. And the transcript leans hard into that. Inside, it says, were manila folders and sealed envelopes. Some notes were described as handwritten, implying intimacy, ownership, intent. Others were compiled by someone else, implying a broader network or at least a pipeline of information flowing into the house. It's a classic escalation. The secret is not a single private thing. It's a system of private things. Then comes the most cinematic prop, a letter that is heavily redacted and stamped classified, do not distribute. The transcript claims that once decoded, the letter hinted at a deal gone wrong. Specifically, a financial transaction that threatened to unravel Tim Allen's reputation in Hollywood. Now, it's important to keep one foot on solid ground here. A sensational online narrative can use the aesthetics of secrecy, stamps, redactions, classified language, to inflate tension without proving authenticity. Even if a paper looks official, the story still hinges on interpretation. But within the internal logic of the transcript, this alleged document serves a clear purpose. It reframes the panic room as a vault for leverage. Because a deal gone wrong isn't just embarrassing, it's destabilizing. It implies pressure, liability, and the kind of fear that makes people erase footage, block entrances, and lock files behind biometrics. And if you accept the premise for even a moment, you can see how the previous details begin to lock into place. The coded boxes in the garage, storage, the biometric cabinet, archives, the surveillance obsession, monitoring risk, the panic room, containment of proof. The transcript doesn't stop there. It adds another layer meant to feel colder. The idea that the panic room wasn't simply built to protect something valuable. It was built to keep something from escaping, whether that something is information, exposure, or consequences. It's a subtle shift in framing, but it changes the emotional meaning of the entire house. Suddenly, security isn't a response to threat. Security is a tool of control. And that brings us to the next pivot: people. If the estate holds secrets, the transcript asks, what happens to the people who get too close to those secrets? Here the narrative moves away from architecture and into social disappearance, which is always a powerful move in this genre, because it turns a property mystery into a human one. The transcript claims that several former associates, people once close to Allen, seem to vanish from the public record without normal professional transitions. Not the usual story of assistants changing jobs or publicists shifting clients. The phrasing is designed to sound absolute. No goodbye statements, no visible next step, social accounts shut down, contact lines severed. This is where the story takes its most ethically loaded step, because implying that people disappeared can carry a heavy insinuation. In real life, people leave industries quietly for countless reasons: burnout, NDAs, a desire for anonymity, health, family, relocation, financial independence, simply wanting out. But the transcript frames these quiet exits as a pattern with a darker cause: that they knew too much. It introduces a named figure, James Blackwell, described as a longtime personal assistant who allegedly handled high-level scheduling and maintained the public image. After a sudden fallout, he allegedly disappeared. Social media is shut down, personal contacts unavailable, no public trace. Again, this is a claim from the video narrative, not independently demonstrated within the transcript. Its function is clear. A confidant is dangerous, because a confidant can become a witness. Then another name appears: Claire Reynolds, described as a former PR expert who shaped his persona during peak years. After a secretive fallout, she allegedly vanished from media visibility, with colleagues implying pressure and discomfort with some things she was involved in. Notice how the transcript uses ambiguity to create dread. It never specifies what some things are. It doesn't need to. It wants the audience to fill the gap with their worst assumptions. And that is the recurring mechanism of this story. Gaps become meaning. A dead space in a blueprint becomes a hidden room. A deleted hard drive becomes an erased truth. A sealed door becomes a confession. A quiet career exit becomes a disappearance. If you step back, you can see how the narrative is built to be self-reinforcing. Each claim makes the next claim feel more plausible, because the emotional texture is consistent. Secrecy, control, removal, silence. The estate becomes a physical metaphor for a life curated to limit exposure. And Allen, the public-friendly figure, becomes the contrast that gives the story its sting. The warmer the public image, the more shocking the alleged private concealment. By the end of this part of the transcript, the bad thing found in the estate is no longer a single object. It's the implication of a hidden narrative, one that required structural concealment, informational lockdown, and social distancing from those who once had proximity. And then the transcript leaves the viewer with the most dangerous question of all, because it forces a moral leap. Was this secrecy the ordinary paranoia of a famous man protecting privacy, or was it the deliberate architecture of someone protecting something that should never surface? At this stage of the story, the estate is no longer being framed as a luxury property with odd quirks. In the transcript's logic, It has become a pressure chamber, one where every attempt to verify the truth is met with a reaction designed to end the inquiry. And when a narrative reaches that point, it typically needs one final element to justify the fear it has been building, a detail that feels ritualistic, coded, almost symbolic. That is exactly what the transcript introduces next. A former contractor, speaking anonymously in the video's account, claims he once worked on the panic room during a renovation years before the home was ever discussed publicly. His task was supposedly routine: repairs, checks, ensuring the secure space functioned properly. But, as the story goes, he noticed markings, strange symbols etched into the walls, faint enough to miss unless you were specifically looking. Not decorative, not consistent with any design theme, not the kind of detail a contractor expects to find in a utilitarian room built for security. The transcript uses this moment carefully. It doesn't say the contractor understood the symbols. It says he couldn't make sense of them, which is exactly what makes them powerful in the narrative. Unknown symbols imply a language you are not supposed to read. They suggest planning that happened outside ordinary channels. They imply that someone wanted to leave meaning behind, but only for the right eyes. When the contractor asked about the symbols, again, this is all according to the video's story, he was told it was part of the room's security enhancements. A dismissive answer that sounds plausible on the surface while explaining nothing. Yet the contractor, in the transcript, doesn't accept the explanation emotionally. He returns the next day, and the markings are gone, covered up, not cleaned, not repainted casually, concealed, as if someone realized the symbols have been seen and needed to be erased from the record. That detail functions like a mini version of everything that came before. Discovery followed by removal. A blueprint void gets sealed. A cabinet gets moved. A surveillance system gets wiped. Now, even a scratch on a wall gets covered once it is noticed. The estate becomes less a home and more a machine for eliminating traces. From there, the transcript pivots into theories, which is an important word to keep in mind because it signals that what follows is speculation rather than verified fact. The story says rumors continued for years about the panic room's true purpose. Some believed it was merely a secure vault for valuables. Others believed it was a refuge from threats. But the theory the transcript wants to elevate is the darkest one, that the panic room protected not wealth, but evidence, documents, photos, recordings capable of destroying a public image. That framing matters because it transforms the panic room from a defensive structure into an offensive asset. If the room contains leverage, then it isn't simply about safety. It is about power. Power to control what people know, power to shape narratives, power to prevent consequences. In that interpretation, the house becomes an extension of a celebrity's ability to manage not only their privacy, but other people's exposure as well. Then comes what the transcript calls the final revelation, the moment meant to close the loop. Investigators are allegedly granted access during a later inspection, and the sealed space is discovered to contain a hidden compartment behind a false wall. Inside are manila folders and sealed envelopes, plus notes, some alleged to be in Alan's handwriting, some compiled by someone else. And among these items is the letter described as heavily redacted and stamped with classified, do not distribute. Now, from a purely rational standpoint, viewers should recognize this is a high-drama storytelling device. Classified, language, redactions, and the idea of decoding create the atmosphere of conspiracy without requiring the transcript to prove chain of custody, authenticity, or context. But within the narrative, the purpose is straightforward, to suggest that what was feared was real, and that the panic room was a vault for information tied to a deal gone wrong, an alleged financial transaction that could have destabilized reputation and career. At this point, the transcript shifts its tone from mystery toward warning. It claims that whatever the specifics of the papers were, they explained why there was so much secrecy, why inspections were stopped, why access was denied, why traces were erased. The house is painted as a place where risk was managed like an operation. Identify the leak, seal the leak, remove the proof, reset the story. And then the transcript makes its sharpest pivot. It links the estate's secrecy to the social disappearances described earlier, not as proven cause and effect, but as an implied pattern. People who knew too much allegedly fell out of the narrative, leaving no public footprint, no obvious trace, no comfortable explanation. The story wants you to feel that the house didn't merely hide things. It had gravity. It pulled people into silence. This is where the transcript's emotional payoff is designed to land. The unsettling idea that a public figure known for being familiar and safe could have lived behind a private architecture built around concealment. It's a classic contrast play. The more wholesome the public image, the more shocking the implication of hidden darkness. But notice how the transcript ends without closure. It suggests secrets, it implies danger, it gestures at evidence, yet never fully defines what the bad thing was in a way that can be tested. Instead, it leaves you with ambiguity and a question that keeps the comment section alive. If you were walking through that house, would you trust the explanation you're given? Or would you feel the same instinct the alleged buyers felt? An instinct to leave before you learn what the locked doors are protecting? By the end of the transcript's journey through Tim Allen's estate, the story isn't really about a house anymore. It's about the idea of a house as a shield, and the uncomfortable suspicion that the shield may have been built for more than privacy. The video's narrative takes what begins as a celebrity real estate listing and turns it into a map of avoidance. Spaces that don't align, questions that don't get answered, and traces that vanish right when they're about to be examined. What makes the account effective is that it doesn't rely on one explosive discovery. It relies on repetition, a pattern, the same rhythm playing across different parts of the property until it starts to feel intentional. First, there's the mismatch problem, the alleged discrepancies between official documents and lived space. Corridors that feel wrong, rooms that appear larger on paper than in person, wings that are treated as off-limits even to staff who otherwise know every inch of the home. In real estate, quirks can be innocent, but the transcript frames these quirks as directional. They all point towards something being withheld. Then the story introduces the hollow space beneath the house, allegedly revealed through an underground scan that didn't match official disclosures. Again, the transcript doesn't prove what the space is. The impact comes from the reaction, deflection, silence, refusal to elaborate. In this narrative, secrecy is not an accident. It's a response mechanism. From there, the garage becomes the next pressure point. The transcript presents it as a place built to impress, polished, stocked, visually convincing, until you look beyond the cars. Too large for the records, the story says. Structurally inconsistent in ways that suggest extra space or extra purpose. And then the detail that shifts suspicion into alarm. The mechanics pit described as deeper than necessary and reinforced beyond normal requirements. Whether that detail is literal or dramatized, it plays the same role as everything else. It implies the property contains design choices that don't make sense unless you imagine an alternate function. And in the transcript, the moment anyone pushes for examination, the examination is shut down. That pattern, interest followed by abrupt closure, returns again with the panic room. Panic rooms, by themselves, are normal in celebrity homes. But the narrative doesn't treat this one as normal because it allegedly doesn't appear in the expected way. It shows up as a void in a blueprint, a dead space that doesn't have a clear access point. And once outsiders notice the void and request access, the story claims the space is sealed, reinforced, blocked, and essentially erased. Not merely hidden, but rendered unreachable. A hidden room is privacy. A sealed room, especially right before inspection, reads like urgency. The transcript leans on that urgency as its loudest implication. Someone was racing the clock of discovery. Then comes the filing cabinet detail. The most chilling not because it's dramatic, but because it is mundane. A cabinet should be boring. It should be an afterthought. But in this story, it is fitted with a biometric lock, and when buyers' teams attempt to catalog contents, access is denied outright. No negotiation, no explanation, just a hard boundary. The transcript uses that refusal to suggest that the estate didn't just contain secrets. It contained recorded secrets, folders, tapes, handwritten notes, and the alleged photograph of someone who wasn't Tim at all. Whether that is fact or fiction inside the video's storytelling, it does what it is designed to do. It turns the mystery into a moral problem. If there were recordings, if there were documents, if there were images that weren't supposed to exist, then the estate isn't simply private. It becomes predatory in implication. And just when the viewer might still be tempted to shrug it off as rumor, the transcript escalates to surveillance. The house is described as covered by cameras, which again is normal for a celebrity property. But the narrative claims Allen became obsessed with reviewing footage, watching late at night, shaken by something he saw. And then the next day, the entire system is wiped. Every recording, every backup, permanently erased. In the language of suspense, wiping footage is the equivalent of burning the only reliable witness. It doesn't tell you what happened. It tells you someone was afraid of what could be proven. The transcript's last major turn is the alleged final inspection discovery, a hidden compartment behind a false wall, containing folders and sealed envelopes, culminating in a heavily redacted letter stamped classified, "Do not distribute." The story claims this letter hinted at a deal gone wrong, a financial transaction that threatened to unravel reputation and career. You'll notice the narrative never fully defines what the bad thing is. That vagueness is not a weakness, it's a technique. It allows the viewer's imagination to do the work, while the story supplies atmosphere, reaction, and a chain of concealments that feel persuasive even without concrete proof. And then, as the final chilling note, the transcript gestures toward people, associates who allegedly disappeared from Allen's orbit, not with normal public transitions, but with silence that feels enforced. Names are introduced, fallouts are implied, and the story invites a conclusion without stating it directly, that the estate's secrets weren't only about architecture or paperwork, but about controlling who remains close enough to know anything at all. So what does the transcript leave you? With an estate that behaves, in the story's logic, like a machine for containment. Hidden spaces, locked access, removed cabinets, sealed rooms, erased footage, and a public image that feels increasingly out of sync with the private structure described behind the walls. But the most important detail is the one the transcript never answers. If something was truly there, beneath the house, behind the wall, inside that sealed space, was it ever discovered in a way that can be proven? Or did the estate do exactly what it was allegedly designed to do? Absorb the questions, eliminate the evidence, and leave only rumor behind? And that's where the video ends, with the same invitation it began with. Do you believe this was just the extreme privacy of a celebrity protecting his life from the public? Or does the pattern of concealment feel like something darker?